sort of story like that, much of which we could just cast a cold eye on and say, sort of, yeah, too. Or is there something really valuable for our own thinking about love? I don't know. I think naturally I think the latter, otherwise I wouldn't bother teaching you a symposium. Look, I brought a whole lot of markers. I'll probably leave them all behind. So why not just get new ones every week until they run out of money. Okay, now, orange. In honor of Diotima, so you would like orange. By the way, just to say this much, Diotima is without doubt a fictional creation. Let me just explain that her name in Greek means God-honored, and where is she from? Mantinea, and that is roughly, we translated that into English, it would be God-honored from Prophet Town. So Mantus is a prophet. Yeah. So chances of her being real, apart from the fact that there's not a scintilla of reason to think that she's real, I mean, no letters, nothing nobody else mentions her as real. She's a creation, and of course we want to ask ourselves a question, which David Halperin in a famous paper asked this way: why is Diotima a woman? That seems like the wrong question in one way, because you think, well, it must be her genital configuration that makes her a woman, right? The question really he meant to ask, what makes anybody a woman? The question he meant to ask was, why does Plato have a woman teach Socrates about love? So Socrates says, everything I ever learned about love I learned from Diotima, and here's what she told me. And it's important because the context up until now has been one of the presiding or prevailing form of eros in ancient Greece, which is homoerotic in one way of thinking about it. That's where what we think of as all the romance of love goes on. So people married and had children and so on, but they had crushes on other boys. They wrote love letters to other boys. They gave love gifts to other boys. So that's where the stuff that we think of as romance. So if there'd been ancient Valentine cards, they would have been of the sort that, an older man would send to a boy. You didn't send Valentines to your wife, or to women you were trying to marry, or to prostitutes you were trying to pay, right? So you don't have to. We know a lot about ancient prostitution. It's kind of a very interesting realm of study all by itself. Okay, so what we want to understand is, by introducing a woman, a female perspective, into the whole sort of a homoerotic ethos that's prevailed at the symposium up to now, Plato is obviously wanting to take a big change of perspective. Right? We're going to get a woman's view of eros, and one of the reasons I think that he thinks that's very important. Well, of course, he doesn't play. He said, "No, we're going to hear from the women," right? Doesn't do that. Instead, he just gives her the best theory, which is much better thing to do. But what it does is it brings into play something and brings it in a very creative way, which is the fact that sex and reproduction are tied together. So that's not something that, in a way, you might say, homoeroticism separates sex from reproduction because it's not reproductive sex. But the question we want to ask, right, is, when we do, so it's a great question is, what is sex? Which I defy you to answer, since in my view it's just about as hard to answer as any why question or what question you can think of. It's a really hard question. And I don't mean, when, damn it, this damn thing. I mean, come on, especially,
Oh, I didn't see this.
And maybe that one writes invisibly, so that just in case you don't want anybody to read what you're writing, you use that one. They have to breathe on it or something. So, okay, now, so we've got sex. And the question we want, aren't we lucky? Socrates says human beings are lucky because they're in heat all year round. Sex, I'm not sure he's right about that. Sex is, we've got reproduction, And the question we want to ask, so when we put like non-reproductive sex, so we've got those two kinds, reproductive we call it, reproductive and non-reproductive sex. The question we have to ask ourselves, since we know there are those two kinds, it's very easy to fall into the reverse of the Freud position. So Freud says sex and reproduction are only soldered together, therefore they don't form a natural unity, therefore we can study sex and should think of it independently of reproduction. So that's one way to go when you see this, right? A different way would be, say, the Orthodox Catholic view, right, which is you must never separate sex from reproduction. Well, it's true you can use contraceptives, but you shouldn't because the natural unity is reproductive sex. And that results in all kinds of fascinating, weird stuff that Catholic theologians and moral philosophers have tried to deal with. But you see the problem, right? So which should we go for? Should we think that sex is not intrinsically reproductive because it's only soldered together, as Freud says, because we can split it off? Or should we think that it's a natural unity that we've artificially split off? And I don't think you can just think, oh, well, one of those is right. What you should think is, well, what's at stake? What happens if I go one way? What happens if I go the other? What am I doing? And one of the things that Plato is going to do is, first of all, he's going to say that you don't know what sex is. When I tell you the truth about sex, it will turn out that all sex is reproductive, right? And so there'll be a kind, so to speak, there'll be a kind of sex where you can't sever reproduction from sex. And therefore, when we go back to the other one, we could say the mere fact that in normal sexual activity we can't separate it is a kind of false lead. It makes us think something that we shouldn't actually think. So it's a very creative little bit of thinking that says, well, don't, first of all, get right about what sex is. Because if you're saying, is sex reproductive? You better be clear that you're holding on to the right notion with sex. And then the next question will be, when you discover what it is reproduction going to be essential to it or not? If it turns out that when you see what it is, reproduction is essential to it, then you backtrack and say that when we separate it off, you can do that from a certain kind of sex, but you won't then be capturing its essence properly, right? Because you will, in that sense we could say that you are disfiguring it, or you're making a cut where nature doesn't make a cut. But lots has to happen before we can see that. And so that's one of the exciting parts, is that even when we finally do our analysis of sex, it will turn out that all sex is reproductive in essence, or sex is essentially reproductive, but contingently non-reproductive. That would be the way to put it. So when it gets at its essence, we'll go for the reproductive side, even though we can't separate it off. So let's now attach another notion. All right, so that's the sex question. Now we've got the love question. And of course, the relationship between those two is controversial too. So if you were a Freudian, right, all love is sexual is just some case of its aim inhibited. For other people, no, it's essentially not sexual. It just can be sexual. So it's essentially non-sexual, contingently sexual. For Freud, it's essentially sexual, contingently aim inhibited. So again, you face a question of which one should we go for? So is all love sexual, non-sexual, or some in between, right? Some is sexual, some is non-sexual. Which should we go for? And again, I want to encourage you to always have in mind the epistemic authority question. How are you going to settle this? It shouldn't just be obvious to you that you know how to settle it. Or you can use your intuitions or anything else to settle it. Okay, so that's the next question. So how is love connected to sex? As a all love sexual or is some non-sexual? What gets at the essence of love? And Plato is going to argue that all love is sexual, but not sexual in the way you think. Since you don't know what sex is, you're not in a position yet to say, no, that's wrong. So if you look up platonic love in the dictionary, you'll discover that it's non-sexual love. Right? We just had a platonic relationship.
Yeah.
That means, there was no sex involved. And that's exactly wrong. Right? That's just what platonic love isn't. Platonic love is sexual. It's just that it's not sexual in like you're thinking sexual is. Right? It's really sexual. What you think sex is only, a crude image of what true sex is. So that's a lot of revolutionary thought, and we want to see if there's anything in it that we should hold on to, or should we just think, yeah, well, let's get over that. Right? So how are we going to get to this picture? Well, here's the way I want to start. So I'm going to tell you the heterosexual version of it, but you can fill the flavors in any way you want. Doesn't matter. Right. I want to ask this question. So when this is a canonical story about love, right? That you want to be loved for yourself. Right? And we certainly know what it rules out. Not for your money, not for your power, not for what you can do for the other person in some sense, but something deeper than that, something, as we say, tighter in, more about you than that. But what about you? Okay, if I said, okay, so you want to be loved for yourself, well, tell me what it is you want me to do, right? Okay, give me a recipe, man. I don't follow this stuff, so help me to understand better. So you give me some negatives, and I say, okay, so you don't want that, you don't want that, you don't want that. So, but what do you want then? Tell me the positive story. So, so each one of these says, I want to be loved for myself. Full stop. Right? And you hear that, and it's big. It's a rather slogan. Of love. And I want to ask this question, since it's obvious. What is myself? And notice I'm not saying what is myself, because you might have views about that. I mean, what is it that I'm talking about when I say I want to be loved for myself? What is that? And here's a quick way into the complexity, which Diotima, again, I think, Plato will brilliantly put on the table. This is so easy to forget. And that is, we are always inclined to forget. Anyway, Heidegger is our guide. Time. Right? So notice that John and Mary, the two characters in this love story, right? Notice something about them. They're metabolizing, changing entities. So right now, in the canonical love story, right, they're about 18, right? Romeo and Juliet age, just the age when, well, love is flourishing and flowering in one of its forms. So Mary is 18, and we'll make John 17, just to keep things interesting. So he's in luck. An older woman loves them, so with a chance he might learn something. Not much of a chance, but still. There they are, right? 17 and 18, and each says, I want to be loved for myself. Now, there's a fact that we know, right, which is, roughly speaking, if they live long enough, in 17 years, they'll be 17 years older. So, right? Yes. And that doesn't mean that 17 years will have gone by, but they'll be just the same. They're not numbers, right? Number one doesn't age. It's not like, how much older is it now than it was 100 million years ago? Well, 100 million years have gone by, but the number one is not kind of getting old and worn out, right? It's nearly zero now, so much of it is worn away, right? That doesn't change. But we do change, and that means that we've got to take into account change. And change instantly raises deep problems, right? So here's an issue that came up we were talking about. So what happens if John changes? So, right, Mary loves John the way John is now, and no doubt there's some thought that he won't change too radically, too quickly, right? But already there's a worry, which is he'll change in ways that Mary doesn't like, right? Yeah, she'll say something like, "You're not the one I loved. You're not the John I loved." Right? You've changed. Right? So the bet's off now. I said I'd be love, honor, and obey you. But it's not you anymore. You're someone else. I hardly know you now. Right? You're a stranger to me. Right? What? These are in love stories all the time. Right? Like you wake up the next day and you think, who the hell is this? Right? Right? So the fact of change is really important, and it raises this question. So when you ask, right, I want you to love me for myself, and moreover, it's got a kind of indefinite future attached to it, right? So people say, till death us do part. Well, it's a long time. John and Mary are, everything else being equal, a long way away from death. Yep. They could be around for, well, nearly 100 more years. Life expectancies are getting longer and longer, so, 100 years from now, they're still going to be around. And the question is, will they still love each other? And how should you write the recipe? Suppose that John says, this isn't just a one-night stand, Mary. I want this to be forever. I want to live with you forever. I want you to be part of my life. Can sound awfully threatening. Well, I don't know that you're interesting, but forever? That's a long time. I could get sick of Aristotle if I had forever. Learn Aristotle. Okay. So there is a real word, right? It can sound threatening. Eternity always sounds a wee bit threatening to me. No, you're here forever. But what if I don't like it? Right? That's the word. So how does Mary and John write the recipe for what they want that's got the time variable in? When Mary tries to explain to John, she wants to be loved for herself, she recognizes that there's a temporal trajectory involved in what she is. And if she says, I want you to love me for whatever, right? I want you to love me no matter what I become. So if she could take the kind of broad thing, no, you love me no matter what I become, you might think, gee, that's awfully strong, right? I mean, what if you become a homicidal maniac because you suffer brain damage or something, right? Maybe I should try to make sure you get good treatment, but I'm not sure I could be having the kind of loving relationship we're planning with a homicidal maniac or a vegetable, right? So we've got to put some constraints. And that's very difficult to get your mind around. How are you going to do that? So here's the idea that I want to give you to think about. It's actually, although you say you want to be loved for yourself, actually what you want is the following. That's just a formula, and what the formula really picks out is something quite different. What you want, what Mary wants is this. She wants John, this is Mary, this is John, obviously. Oh, maybe not. I want John to take his relationship with me think we make a mistake. So think about the issue of promising to love, right? Love doesn't seem to be under your voluntary control. So you think, how can I promise them? What I think is we really ought to think of, or how can I have a duty to love my children when my love isn't under my voluntary control? Here's what I want to offer you with this thought. When you initiate a relationship, when John and Mary, right, typically, when people are thinking of getting married, nowadays, they're thinking of getting married because they already love each other. So start with the thought that love starts, or the marriages and so on start with people who are already in love. They're not this way. Let's hope that by the time the day of the wedding comes around, we'll have started to love one another. Why do you want to get married if you don't love one another? I mean, leaving aside necessities, etc. Maybe one is pregnant and the other is the impregnator, and that's why they have to get married. No, I'm thinking of the good cases, right? So in the normal, good cases, people get married because they love each other. They want to spend a big part of their life together because they already know. So Mary wants John to take his relationship with me seriously in making important decisions means, of course, he's already doing that. Because look, he wants to marry me and do all that stuff. His love has given me a special place in his weighting of decisions now. And when I want him to love me, I want him to do that. Notice that in this, I want John to take his relationship with me reappears. It's not, right? So when I want to be loved for myself, it's not that I'm thinking there's some magic part of me called myself that I want to be loved for. It's that I want him to take his relationship with me seriously. And the me that he has the relationship with is the me that I want him to take seriously when he makes this decision. So the idea is this, right? What you're promising to do when you marry is to do that, which you can do. When you say, I promise to love, honor, and cherish, or whatever the formula is, until death us do part, I'm not promising to generate the love that I feel. I'm promising to perpetuate it. I already feel it, right? And now I'm thinking about what am I agreeing to? And what I'm agreeing to is that I will take my relationship, my loving relationship with you seriously. Here's why this is a better way to think about it. Because notice it already writes in time. Right? It's not that time comes out of nowhere into it. It's rather that I know that I'm going to change, and I know that you're going to change. But in the way that you change that's under your voluntary control, the ones where you make decisions and so forth, I want those to be the product of you taking me seriously. So let your relationship serious. Let me give an example of how to violate this rule. Right? So right now, Mary is the most important thing in John's life, we can suppose, or one of the most important things. I mean, she's right up there with any other thing he would think is really important. He's got a relationship with her, he's got a relationship with friends and family, he's got a relationship with the subject he studies, he's got a relationship with his country, he's a citizen, he's got all kinds of relations. But when he sort of ranks them in terms of which are the most important ones, she is definitely right up there in the really important ones. That's why we hear things like, I'd die for you. You're really important to me. My relationship with you is really important. So how would I violate it? Well, let's suppose, here's a trivial way, right? So John and Mary get married, and about 2 weeks later, John is off visiting his family in California. He goes to the beach, he sees a really pretty girl. Mary can't go with him, he goes by himself. He sees a really pretty girl and he thinks, maybe I shall try my luck with her, she's really cute. Now, if Mary would be copacetic with that, and he knows that, she just doesn't care if he sleeps with other women when he's away from home, that's okay. He's not failing to take the relationship seriously if he initiates such a get-together. But if he knows that if Mary found out, she'd be devastated, but he decides that, she'll never find out, or, right, chances are she won't, then he doesn't take it seriously. Right? And Mary has grounds for complaint because he's not giving her the weight he undertook to give her in his life. Right? Now, what that weight is, what role you play in each other's lives as relationship continues, that changes a lot. Right? That's not the way it is in this first period. So when love starts, and this the other thing about love is love's not the same all the time. Love too changes. And that's something that you have to, if you're not completely stupid, you've got to take into account when you start getting into the love business, right? So there's a period of limerence. We owe this to some psychologist in Canada, of all places, where I would have thought there wasn't an awful lot of this limerence, but there's a New Yorker cartoon that says, "I don't think we've got enough vodka for 2 more weeks in Canada." Actually, Canada's a great place, we should all go into it. But you see the kind of jokes, right? So limerence is the glow factor in a new romance. So you know that glow factor when you first fall in love with somebody and all you do is think about them and they're kind of surrounded by a little halo of glow, and when they walk into the room, the spotlight instantly goes over there, right? You want to feast your eyes on that, right? That's the thing. The others really don't matter. They're all cast into supporting roles, right? But the one gets the spotlight. And the claim is that in general, that's got a life of about 3 years. Limerence seldom lasts more than that. So if what you're thinking is, we're going to have limerence for the next 100 years, or 30 years, you just don't know enough about yourself, the kind of creature you are, and what love relations are like, right? Now think of another fact. So don't expect a lifetime of limerence. And that's not what you're promising. If you promise that, you're deceived about the nature of your own abilities and the kind of creature you are and what limerence is. What you're saying is, right, limerence gets us into the business of wanting to get together, wanting to have sex with each other, wanting to get married, and wanting to start a relationship in which we take each other seriously in making the decisions. Notice that each does it. So it's not this. I just become whatever I'm going to become anyway. What I become is actually a function of my relationship with Mary, if I'm John. Right? Why? Well, because if I follow the recipe that I undertake to follow, I will become things that keep in track with taking my relationship with Mary seriously. Now, of course, shit can happen, right? Right? Stuff that's got nothing to do with my decisions happen. I get hit by a car, I suffer brain damage. That's not part of the deal. It can't be this, that Mary says, well, you said you wouldn't change, and the next thing you did is go out and get hit by a car, and now you're brain damaged. Man, that's not taking the relationship seriously. And it might be that what happens is that because of what happens to John, he can't take the relationship with Mary seriously. He can't take anything seriously. He can't take, right? He's not in the position of somebody who can be expected to give that kind of weight to anything. So it's not as if this is an open-ended agreement that it violates natural facts, like that stuff can happen to you that you have no control over. But insofar as you become what you become as a result of making decisions, your relationship is not an external feature of those decisions. It's an internal one that structures what decisions you make. Let me take an example. So John and Mary get married, and they have this great limerence period. They spend a lot of time making love. They spend a lot of time going on romantic dates. They find a place together. They start fixing it. They nest a little, but as yet there are no fledglings. And then one day, Mary says, typically, but not always, Mary says, don't you think it's time we had children? And either John runs away at that point because he's not sure that it's ready. He's ready, as men say. I'm not sure I'm ready. Right? And so that can become a big issue. Well, I can wait a little. It doesn't have to be right now. I just want to put it on the agenda. This is a huge issue typically for couples. Will they still agree when it comes around time to reproduce? But at a certain point, they make the decision that they're going to have a child together. Now, the issue of taking the relationship seriously has a new dimension. It's not just the relationship between John and Mary, but between John, Mary, and X. So this is how the obligation that you have to love your children comes in. So when you make, again, under sort of good conditions for getting married, that's what I've been describing. Good conditions, each loves the other. They're not coerced, right? They're doing it of their own free will, all that stuff. Now the next is, they decide to have children of their own free will. And unless they're deranged or stupid or uninformed or careless, they have some idea of what they're letting themselves in for. Right? They have some sense of what they're undertaking. And one of the things they're already doing is so making room in their hearts for those future offspring. Right? They're agreeing to include in the love they feel for each other this third being, their offspring. So it's not this, right? They have a child and they have an obligation now to start loving it, and they think, oh, that's not under my control. They shouldn't be having the child if they aren't, right, in this way, set up already to want and love the child. So Mary wants a child. She thinks, I wanted to give the love to a child that you give. I want to get the love from a child that you get. That's what I want. And John does the same, again, in the good circumstances. If they don't do this, right, they're already not doing what they should be doing vis-a-vis each other. They shouldn't be having children together if they aren't in this good condition, right? Doesn't mean that good stuff can't happen and they get it right anyway, but by and large, the right way to go about it is to think, I'm pretty sure I can love a child. I want to give that kind of love to somebody. I want to get it. You do too. It's part of our loving each other that we love this third thing included in our love. If we can't do that, if, for example, John is jealous of his children because they get some of Mary's love, right, that's bad, and vice versa. So now they include, right, little versions of themselves, and people often say this kind of thing. I want a little you, right? I want someone that has some of you and some of me in it, because that shows how perfectly we are. And this language is not stupid. It actually comes close to doing something, not just some biology, but something that reflects us and our relationship, that gets embodied in them, because our love for each other needed or wanted, right, to include children who will then reflect the kind of relationship we have with each other. So they produce these little creatures. This is the way we should try to make sense of the obligation we have to love our children. Not this, right? Well, I don't care about children at all. I have no interest in having them. Now I have one. How am I going to start loving it? I must be by an act of will. That's as stupid as thinking that John and Mary are standing at the altar, and John says, got the promise, I undertake to love you for the rest of my life. And he thinks, well, how am I going to do that? Right? That's not the way it typically happens. Okay, now, that's the modern story that I would want to tell. Okay, so my thought is, notice how we got there. So we start with John and Mary. They want to be loved for themselves. We tried to figure out what that could reasonably be taken to mean, given facts of change and so forth. And rather than develop a metaphysics of the self, so to speak, and say it's for that metaphysical entity that I want to be, that won't, in my view, get anywhere. We're much better off simply expanding, but keeping the current actual relata, John and Mary. Right? Mary wants to be loved for Mary, and she's not thinking a whole lot about the metaphysics of the self or personal identity or anything like that any more than anybody else is. So that's the sort of story I want to tell. Now, let's back up. Notice that in this one, right, we had a view not only about biological reproduction, but about a love for each other that can be, or need, or want to include another being, right? So when Mary and John decide to have children in the good circumstances, right? So they want to do it in the way you should, right? They think there's room in our love. Our love for each other needs or wants this other thing to be part of it. We want to have children as part of the love that we feel for each other. And luckily, we're the kinds of beings who can reproduce. I took the heterosexual example. But suppose that we change it. Suppose it's not John and Mary, but it's John and Frank. And John and Frank can't reproduce of themselves. They won't get a baby by having sex with each other. But they want a child. So now we can see that the love that wants children needn't be directly tied to the reproductive capacity to have them. And of course, that could be equally true if it turned out that either John or Mary couldn't have children, right? So John and Mary, normally they could produce children of their own by reproducing, but it turns out that John is sterile. He can't, sperm don't fertilize an ova. So, right, he can't have biological children with Mary, but he wants to have children with her. And so they make a compromise, as couples often do, in some sort of sperm donor or friend gives some semen, or they do other things in order that they can have a child of their own, though not in the normal way that people do. And with John and Frank, it's going to be even different, right? They're going to have to adopt a child or do one of those other things that we do to have. And when we're thinking about that, notice, we're thinking about the need that the lovers have for this other thing that they're going to bring up together and love. Not because, as it happens, when you have sex, the normal consequence for heterosexuals is that you get pregnant, someone gets pregnant. That's not it. This is where we're thinking now quite differently. The reproductive side of love, even in this little story, is not itself tied to sexual reproduction, right? It just happens to be for John and Mary, but not for John and Frank, and maybe not for John and Mary if one or the other of them can't. So here we've got a possibility for thought about love, that it does something reproductive. It has reproductive needs, even if those reproductive needs are not satisfied by sexual reproduction, right? And of course you could see this if it went this way. So take in vitro fertilization. Now at the moment, right, when you, and lots of couples now have children by in vitro fertilization. So each of them, the female contributes some ovae and the male contributes some sperm, and the ova is fertilized in a petri dish, and then when the fertilized ovum is ready, it's implanted in the female's uterus. But you can easily imagine this happening not in the uterus at all, right? We could have an artificial uterus, a bottle or some nice device like that, in which the fertilized ovum can grow and embryo can grow and develop and so on. It wouldn't, so if we sort of start moving the reproductive side away from bodies and other locations, when we're already sort of thinking, oh, there's a kind of reproduction. That's sexual only in the sense that the genetic material is produced by two sexes. It doesn't result from sexual intercourse. Right? So we need to think broadly, but still, we're quite rooted in reality. We're not going off into Never Never Land when we tell this story. Right? And the only point I want to make about it is notice how reproductive urges, reproductive wishes, have grown not out of the sexual capacity to have children, but out of the felt need for a third thing. That one of the ways we love each other is by loving a third thing together. This child is going to be our joint enterprise and work. Even if it's not biological, if it's an adopted child, it's going to bear the marks of our loving each other, and it'll develop as it does in part because of the unique way that we love each other. So the child is going to sort of be a reflection of those complex connections. Okay, so that's the kind of preliminary. Now what we want to do is go back to Diotima and see what story she tells about this. Are you okay? Yeah.
So Was your thought that the I want John to trace his relationship with me, that's replacing the
I want to be loved for myself, yeah.
Because I would have thought, and maybe we don't need to dwell too much on
Yeah.
this, since this
Yeah.
is more about what
Yeah.
young people do think about love, as
Yeah.
Plato. But I would have thought that the I want to be loved for myself is the kind of thing that's grounding in some way the commitment to the relationship. So I get the sense of what people want.
Yeah.
They don't want to be loved. So if John is going to take his relationship with me
Yeah.
seriously out of duty,
Yeah.
or because has some religious commitment to
Yeah.
being faithful to his
Yeah.
wife, that's a lot of people. That's not what they're looking for,
Yeah.
or certainly not because of my instrumental value,
Yeah. Yeah.
or and so
Good.
there's
Yeah.
a sense that it. And obviously, people aren't doing any complicated.
Yeah.
They're not reading Parfit to figure out what they mean by myself.
Yeah.
But
Unless they're one of us.
right? Yeah. But I think they're thinking about. I think we think about
Yeah.
like our quirks. What are
Yeah.
like the little strange things about our personalities? And when we think about the ways that we change, I think maybe some people would say, well, then give up on me. Like, let's give up on the relationship if we change too much. But I think another thing people would say is, well, no, I want you to learn how to love
Yeah.
the new me.
Yeah. So you have a bunch of points in there.
Sorry,
They're all really good ones. So notice that I finessed the first one about the basis, because I said in the good circumstances, John and Mary feel this limerence for each other, and that's the basis of their undertaking the promise. So that rules out the thought that there's nothing like that to start with. It's rather just at the altar. John and Mary never met before. They don't have any feelings for each other, but they're kind of dutiful folk, right? And so John thinks, well, gee, here we are at the altar. We might as well make these promises to each other as to anyone else, right?
Right.
Yeah. So that's the first point. It's crucial that there be the limerence story. So that's the normal thing. And of course, there are other possibilities. There are other possibilities being, for example, in arranged marriages, that you hope that this will be the start of something in which this other thing will emerge and grow, and if it doesn't, that's sad, and so on. Okay, so that's the first thought. And there's the other one. So you can't do it this way. And this is a problem with Parfit, too. You can't just say, if I change too much, right? Because it might be that I change enormously, but in ways that you have no problems with, because you've been part and parcel of arranging those changes, right? This is especially obvious with a child, right? You start out, what is there to love? Well, it's just a little, there's not much going on there. Eating and pooping, that's about it, right? It's not like you're thinking, although people do. Yeah, there was a great New Yorker cartoon. There's a lot of wisdom in these. There are two birds, sitting on a nest with a little egg, and one is saying to the other, if I do say so myself, that's the most beautiful egg I've ever seen. Yeah, people do sort of say this kind of stuff about their babies, right? Even, in my view, pretty hideous-looking babies. But notice that in loving a baby, you're supposing that the thing is going to change radically. If it didn't, that would really be scary, right? No, he's 18. He just stayed a baby, I guess. That's a worry that parents have, which is that young people want to stay children longer. That is, they want to live with you and eat your stuff until they're 30 now. They don't want to. You can't boot them out of a nest. You can fly, get out. Right? You can't do that. They come back and keep eating your stuff and driving your car and using up everything till God knows when. Okay, so notice with the children, we don't at all think this, right? My love is conditional on you not changing very much. It's actually conditional on you changing a lot, right? And the next thought is, well, here's what we're wanting, right? It's not how much change, it's how my relationship with you figures in the change. So let me give you the Parfit example, and then we'll pick up on the question. So Parfit doesn't properly distinguish between psychological continuity, that's simply what comes, So whatever it is that's fulfilling this intention, if you don't know about profit, don't worry about it. Right? It's not that. Because the thought is, it might well be that when, suppose I'm a liberal now, but the profit imagines, the future self will be spending my retirement fund as going to be a right-wing Republican. And the thought is, why should I want to set money aside for what that guy will do with my money, right? And that dramatizes the situation in one way. But here's another way. Suppose I believed that my becoming that Republican would be as a result of my deeper understanding of the world, my better grip on values, now I see it as not as a threat to, I think it all depends how I see how that future self is going to grow out of this present. And when I see that it's happening as a result of decisions I'm making on the basis of increasing knowledge. So take an aesthetic example, it's much easier, right? So right now, you just love, I think it's, I can't remember the names of any popular writers because I never read them because I think they're crap. But pick one, Tom Robbins. That's one, isn't it? I don't know. Pick one you all know and love. Yeah, Agatha Christie, there you go. I'm a passionate Agatha Christie fan. And I say, she's a crime story writer. Yeah, you don't know that. You should all just commit suicide now because I'm joking. Don't do that.
Oh no, that's my political agreement.
Just pick some crappy writer that you think is the bee's knees now. And when you think about a great one like Shakespeare or Proust, and you think, you know, when I'm 60, I'm going to be reading Proust. Why should I set money aside for somebody who's going to read that? It's so boring, I can't stand them. But when you think, no, I won't be finding it boring, not because I've become senile in the meantime, but because I've grown, richer and more complex. Parfit sort of pitches it in a way that skews your intuitions, I think, but you can pitch it in another way. So I think that what matters here is not how much you change. Mary and John are going to change a lot. They're going to get old. Their bodies are going to change. Their interests and focus is going to change. The limerence is going to disappear. There's a massive set of changes that they should be expecting because they're coming. And the thought is, how should I think about how those changes are going to register with me? And the way I should think about it is that, look, I'm part and parcel of the changing. When you change taking your relationship with me seriously, you're doing it in a way that, in a sense, I co-sign, right? Because at each stage, that's what each of us is doing. We're kind of changing in tandem, not because one's mimicking the other, but because when you change and I take my relationship with you seriously, I think about how that's going to play with me, right? And as long as I'm being taken seriously as the changing entity I am, I don't have those grounds for complaint. What typically causes things to go wrong is that that's not how the changes have occurred, right? So, unfortunately for us, right, the first part is fairly straightforward, right, where people are in love, get married, and have children. That part has kind of got a motor that drives it pretty much by itself. But then the way our culture is set up puts enormous stressors on whether or not we can grow and change, taking each other seriously, right? And that means that when marriages break up, it's typically not, you've changed a lot. It's that you haven't changed in ways that have proper regard for your relationship with me. You haven't given up the proper way. You've done things that violate that, and that's why. So that was good. Thanks for asking. Yeah.
Yeah. So I also had a similar concern with the word. I guess interpreting the claim like I want to be loved for myself, where the initial question of like, what do you mean by yourself gets a little bit trickier. So it's not the case that you mentioned or Joseph mentioned. It's not the case where I talk about gravity of relationship or gravity of commitment.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's the occasions when I ask my lover, partner to love me for myself, what I'm asking you to do is to respect the choices that I make or the changes that I voluntarily go through in my life as an individual, apart from the role that I'm playing in this relationship. So I'm thinking of a case where like, like what I ask you to do when I ask you to love me for myself is to acknowledge that I'm still a person with like certain
Yes.
values and life goals apart from my role in this relationship.
That's okay.
Yeah.
No, it's not. You'd be very foolish if you. Suppose, for example, you fall in love with a terrific chess player. I mean, a world-class chess player whose devotion to chess is obvious, manifest, right? You can see it. That's what he does, right? It would be very foolish if what you thought was, well, I should be really interested in the following question, namely, do I matter more to him than chess? What's better to say is, I want to be in the set of things that matter that way. I don't expect that it's always going to be true, that, if I have needs and the chess has needs, mine will be answered. It might be that the others are more pressing, and I certainly can't keep demanding that. It would be a violation if chess always won out, or even when things were really serious, right? Yeah. So it's not that all your choices have to stem from the relationship. It's that all of them have to be sensitive to the relationship. But of course, the other person should be sensitive to your other commitments and the other relationships in which you're in. For example, I mean, imagine you've already got, when you stand there at the altar, everything else being equal, you have deep relationships with other people besides your beloved, your mother and father, your sisters, your friends, and a person who says, you're going to have to give all that up, right? I want to be the most important one. Probably you shouldn't get married, right? Why? Well, that's kind of insane. I mean, to demand that everything be reconfigured that way. What you want is, you want to come in the important class. You don't want to be disregarded. You don't want to be always downplayed relative to other things. You want to be a major player in the decisive decisions. But some of those are relationship-independent relationships that you've already got that have come to it not filtered through the relationship, but that you find out about in the period of getting to know one another a bit, and you either accept or you don't. So if you see that your boyfriend just loves to go out to bars with the guys and watch sports, and you think that's all going to change as soon as you get married, and then you complain and moan when he does that, well, that wasn't very sensible of you. You should have really gotten clear about that earlier. What you see is often, unfortunately, what you get, right? So you have to be careful not to think that, and that's one of the things we think, oh, she's like that now. But when we get married, she'll change because, I'll change her. Well, that's not a good operating assumption, right? So when we say, don't try to change me, which we often do, right? Don't try to change me. Take me as I am or let me go, right? We're registering not some stupid thought of, look, I know I'm a pig, but I'm trying to stay one. It's not like that. Like, we're so committed to the present features we've got that we just won't give them up. You shouldn't ever get near such a person, right? No, it's rather this, right? We don't want to become something else as a result of another person's will and control, because that's not respecting us and who we are, right? So there's a lot about we need to filter into the picture to get that right, but all of that should be taken. So the me here, that's why I wanted to keep it. You're not asking to be loved for something special, some special metaphysical thing. It's just merely that you want to be loved for. And you don't have to decide questions like this. Well, my hair? Is it my figure? Is it my eyes? Is it my vast knowledge of set theory? What is it exactly you love me for? You really just don't have to. You can imagine a relationship when that's really important. How do you do this problem? Oh, you just do that. Oh, great, thanks. Right, or that, or she can recite the Iliad in Greek. She does it all the time. Right?
At night.
That, right? You shouldn't be in that game. You can see why. Because it doesn't go anywhere. Right? That game is not going to go anywhere. You'll never find that thing. What's true is you want whatever you are, to be given the relationship with you to be given the right sort of weight. You don't have to settle the metaphysical question. All you have to do in this story is, here's the bottom line relative to Diotima. I guess we'll stop it at 5 and then return and talk about Diotima. But you have to take away so that you see how much Diotima's story gives us, which we are easily blinded to and don't recognize to already be part of our own story about that, is the following. First, the love relationship is already in place before something else starts to happen. It doesn't have to get generated by anything. It gets generated in whatever way it does get generated. You see someone, you get attracted to them. Whatever that is, it's probably not going to enter into our theory as any more than a pretty much brute fact. We are attracted to other people, and we don't know exactly why, which is when we try to say why, we start babbling about chemistry and other sorts of things because we don't really know why it is this one stands out. And then we start trying to tell ourselves some story about it, and they're always hopeless because they never hit the nail on the head. And I think, so stop doing that. Take it as a fact that, you look around the room and one person stands out for you. We could probably tell some complicated psychoanalytic story about why that one does. Maybe she looks like your mother, whatever. Or not like your mother, right? Right, whatever it is. But we don't know that story, right? We don't know why we're attracted that way. But we are. And that starts something. It might finish very quickly. So you might think, and start moving towards and, get close and start a conversation, and then think, oh, God, no. Right? And then move, right? The initial attraction didn't survive just the next bit. Like, who's your favorite novelist? Oh, Enid Blyton. Oh, okay. Thanks. Wait, I think I see someone I know over there. Yeah. All right. So that's the first. Then the other is that the reproductive side of a relationship is not simply biological or sexual in the direct biological sense of sexual reproduction. The love relationship can wish, as it were, part of loving one another can be to love a third thing as embodying the love and relationship you feel for each other, even if that's not something that you yourself produce sexually. So it's a kind of reproductive side to love that the sexual side only for the most part captures. It doesn't do it for same-sex couples, it doesn't do it for infertile couples. Okay? And the other thought is the importance of time in the relationship. So what does Mary want? She wants John to reproduce the relationship with her as he goes on through his life. And she wants her to reproduce the relationship. But notice, the relationship is not itself a fixed entity either. Both of the relata are changing, partly, if everything goes well, by taking seriously that they are relata. And so the relationship itself grows and changes as the relata do in response to each other taking the relationship seriously. So the relationship that people have at 18, they're, I hope, not going to be having at 40 if they stay together. A relationship that was like, that would be like a baby that stayed the same age, stayed the same level of development from birth until it was 30. We expect a relationship to deepen, to develop, to become quite other, with even different focus. So maybe right here the focus is on sexual activity. A lot of focus on sexual activity in the early stages of a relationship. That's part of the limerence part. But it's rare and wouldn't be anything wrong with it, but would be rare if it still had that as its primary focus 20 years later. After all, children are probably entered the scene, so have lots of other things that are just as important. Sex has still maybe important, but has diminished. All of these things, we've got plenty of evidence tells us are so. Now, what we have to be thinking is when we're getting into the business is that we're aware of those facts. They don't come as some kind of massive surprise. So if John says to Mary, after they've been married for 20 years, I just don't feel like kind of limerence for you anymore. So maybe we shouldn't be together. I think my love died. You think, I don't know what to say to you. Right? I mean, because after all, it's sort of like your expectation is massively out of accord with reality. That's not what you should be expecting. That's not to say that we can't be having hot sex or really be into each other when we're after 20 years, but we shouldn't expect it to be the baseline norm or the core around which much of our relationship is built. That would be to suppose we never grew up, right? We never developed and changed. Part of developing and changing is that other things that are important to us move into different areas in our lives together. Okay, let's stop there for a bit. You can digest it a little, and then we'll come back and look at how Diotima records in a quite different way all of the facts that I've just or all of the ideas.
David, who wrote 50 Shades of Grey?
Huh?
Who wrote 50 Shades of Grey?
Oh, yeah.
Leave Agatha Christie out of it. She's good.
Leave her alone.
Yeah,
She's not that bad.
she's not.
Well, she's
They're
not
much
Proust
worse.
either. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but they're much
I can't
worse.
remember. I can't remember who wrote
Yes,
50
the
Shades
same.
of
I was trying to recall it and it didn't come up.